Jake had always been the type of guy who helped others. At 28, he worked as a graphic designer during the day, but his evenings were different. Every Tuesday, he drove across town to the community center where he taught art classes to people with disabilities. It wasn't something he did for recognition or to feel good about himself. He just enjoyed seeing people discover they could create something beautiful with their own hands. That particular Tuesday evening started like any other. Jake arrived early, set up the paints and brushes, and arranged the easels in a circle. The usual group of students trickled in one by one. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, who painted flowers despite being legally blind. Tom, a young man with cerebral palsy, always chose bright colors for his abstract pieces. And Quiet Lisa, who used a mouth stick to paint because her hands didn't work the way she wanted them to. Jake loved these people. They had taught him more about life than any college course ever could. But tonight would be different. Tonight, someone new was coming to class. The rain was coming down hard outside when he heard a commotion at the door. Someone was struggling with the heavy entrance, and Jake could hear muffled apologies through the glass. He walked over to help, expecting to find someone with crutches or maybe a wheelchair. Instead, he found a young woman about his age, completely soaked from the rain, trying to balance an umbrella, a purse, and what looked like art supplies. But what caught his attention wasn't the rain dripping from her dark hair or her frustrated expression. It was her arms. She had prosthetic arms, both of them. The mechanical hands gripped her belongings with precise movements, but Jake could see the concentration it took for her to manage everything. "Oh, thank you so much," she said as Jake held the door open. "I thought I'd be fine. But this rain came out of nowhere, and I'm still getting used to, well, you know." She gestured slightly with one prosthetic arm, and Jake realized she was talking about managing things in bad weather. He wanted to help carry her stuff, but something in her tone told him to wait. She seemed determined to handle it herself. "I'm Riley," she said, finally getting everything balanced. "I'm supposed to be in the art class, but I'm probably late. Traffic was crazy because of the rain." "I'm Jake, and you're actually right on time," he replied, checking his watch. "Everyone's still getting settled. Don't worry about being late. We're pretty relaxed here." As they walked toward the classroom, Jake noticed how Riley moved. There was nothing hesitant about her steps. She knew exactly where she was going, even though this was her first time here. When they reached the room, she surveyed the space quickly, chose an easel near the window, and began unpacking her supplies. "Hi, everyone," Jake announced to the class. "We have someone new joining us today. Riley, would you like to introduce yourself?" Riley looked up from arranging her paints. "Hi, I'm Riley. I used to paint before." She paused, then smiled. "Well, before life got complicated. I'm excited to get back into it." Jake appreciated that she didn't make a big deal about her prosthetics. She didn't offer a long explanation or ask for special treatment. She just wanted to paint. The class began with their usual warm-up exercise. Jake asked everyone to paint something that made them happy. It was a simple way to get people relaxed and creative. As he walked around the room, offering guidance and encouragement, he kept glancing over at Riley. She was struggling, not with the painting itself, but with the physical mechanics of holding the brush and applying the right pressure. Jake could see the frustration building in her shoulders, the way she kept adjusting her grip, trying to make the prosthetic fingers work the way she wanted them to. Then it happened. As she reached for a different color, her mechanical hand knocked over the jar of water they used to clean brushes. Water splashed everywhere, soaking her painting and the table around her. For a moment, the room went quiet. Jake started to move toward her, ready to help clean up. But then Riley did something unexpected. She started laughing, not a polite, embarrassed laugh, but a genuine, full-bodied laugh that filled the entire room. "Well, that's one way to create a water effect," she said, still chuckling as she looked at her now soggy painting. Her laughter was infectious. Soon, Mrs. Rodriguez was giggling. Then Tom joined in, and before long, the whole class was laughing together. Jake found himself smiling wider than he had in weeks. Here, let me help you clean that up, Jake said, grabbing some paper towels. Thanks, but I've got it, Riley replied. Trust me, I've gotten pretty good at cleaning up my own messes, as she dabbed at the water with paper towels. Jake watched how she had adapted her movements to work with her prosthetics. Every motion was deliberate and practiced. She had clearly spent a lot of time learning how to do everyday tasks in a new way. How long have you been painting? Jake asked, genuinely curious. Since I was a kid, Riley said. My mom always said I had paint in my blood instead of regular blood. I went to art school. Actually, had plans to be a professional artist. She paused, focusing on cleaning up the last of the water. But life had other plans. Jake wanted to ask more, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't ready to share the whole story yet. Instead, he helped her set up a new piece of paper and watched as she started over. This time, she approached the painting differently. Instead of fighting with the brush, she worked with it. Her movements were slower, but more controlled. Jake realized she wasn't trying to paint the way she used to. She was learning to paint in a completely new way. That's really beautiful, said Lisa, the quiet woman who painted with a mouth stick. She had wheeled her chair over to look at Riley's work. I love how you're using the water stains as part of the sky. Riley looked down at her painting, then back up at Lisa. You know what? You're right. Maybe that spill wasn't such a disaster after all. As the class continued, Jake noticed how Riley interacted with the other students. She didn't treat them like they were fragile or different. She asked Tom about his color choices, complimented Mrs. Rodriguez on her flower technique, and even gave Lisa some suggestions about blending colors. It was clear that despite her own challenges, she still had the eye of a trained artist. When the class ended, Jake found himself not wanting Riley to leave. There was something about her energy, her determination, and yes, her laugh, that made the whole room feel brighter. Same time next week, he asked as she packed up her supplies. Definitely, Riley said. And next time, I'm bringing a towel. As she walked toward the door, Jake realized something had shifted inside him. He had spent so much time focusing on helping others that he had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely interested in someone as a person. Riley wasn't just another student in his class. She was someone who had faced something difficult and found a way to keep creating, keep laughing, keep living. After she left, Jake stayed behind to clean up the classroom. As he wiped down the tables and put away the supplies, he kept thinking about Riley's laugh and the way she had turned a small disaster into something beautiful. He found himself looking forward to next Tuesday in a way he hadn't in a long time. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. Sometimes the most important meetings happen when we least expect them, in the most ordinary places, on the most ordinary days. And sometimes, the people who teach us the most about strength and resilience are the ones who are still learning those lessons themselves. The following Tuesday couldn't come fast enough for Jake. He found himself checking the clock at work more often than usual, wondering if Riley would show up again. Maybe last week was just a one-time thing. Maybe she had decided the class wasn't for her after all. But when Tuesday evening arrived, so did Riley. This time, she came prepared with a small towel tucked under her arm and a knowing smile on her face. Learning from last week's adventure, she said, holding up the towel as she walked into the classroom. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Smart thinking. Though I have to say, your water technique actually worked pretty well. You're just being nice, Riley laughed, setting up her easel in the same spot by the window. But I appreciate it. As the weeks passed, Jake and Riley fell into a comfortable routine. She would arrive right on time, set up her materials with practiced efficiency, and dive into whatever project Jake had planned for the class. But what Jake looked forward to most were the conversations that happened after class. It started small. Riley would linger a few minutes longer than the other students, helping Jake clean up the brushes or commenting on someone's artwork. These brief exchanges slowly grew into longer conversations as they walked to the parking lot. Together, I used to hate Tuesdays, Riley told him one evening as they loaded art supplies into Jake's car. It was always the day I had physical therapy appointments, really tough ones where I had to relearn how to do everything. Jake listened without interrupting. He had learned that Riley opened up when she was ready, not when he asked direct questions about her past. But now I actually look forward to them. She continued. It's nice to have something creative to focus on instead of just surviving. Jake understood what she meant. He had seen how art could be healing for people in his class. He had watched students discover parts of themselves they thought were lost. But with Riley, it felt different somehow. She wasn't just healing through art. She was reclaiming who she used to be. What kind of art did you do before? Jake asked as they reached her car. Riley's face lit up. Portraits, mostly. I love capturing people's expressions, especially when they were genuinely happy. There's something about a real smile that you can't fake in a painting. Do you miss it? The portrait work, Riley was quiet for a moment, her prosthetic fingers tapping against her car keys. Every day. But I'm learning that missing something doesn't mean you can't find a new way to have it. These conversations became the highlight of Jake's week. He learned that Riley had been a physical therapist before her accident, working with people who had lost limbs or mobility. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that she now needed the same kind of help she used to provide. The hardest part wasn't learning to use these, Riley said one evening, gesturing to her prosthetic arms. It was learning to accept help from other people. I spent my whole career being the one who helped others get their lives back. Suddenly, I was on the other side of that equation. Jake began to understand why Riley was so determined to do things herself. It wasn't stubbornness or pride. It was her way of rebuilding her identity after it had been completely changed. You know what's funny? Riley said during one of their parking lot conversations. People assume that losing my arms was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And don't get me wrong, it was terrible. But in some ways, it also showed me what I was really made of. Jake found himself sharing things with Riley that he hadn't told anyone else. He talked about his own struggles with relationships, how he had always been better at helping others than letting people get close to him. Maybe that's why you volunteer here, Riley suggested. It's easier to care about people when there's a clear way to help them. Relationships are messier. There's no instruction manual. She was right, and Jake knew it. He had spent years keeping people at arm's length, telling himself he was just focused on his work and his volunteering. But the truth was, he was afraid of getting hurt. What about you? Jake asked. Do you think you'll ever want to try dating? Again, Riley was quiet for a long moment. I tried a few times after the accident, but it's complicated. Some guys act like I'm made of glass, like they have to be careful around me. Others act like I'm some kind of inspiration just for existing. And then there are the ones who are just curious about how everything works, if you know what I mean. Jake felt a surge of anger on her behalf. That's awful. It's just reality, Riley shrugged. I've kind of accepted that I might be better off alone. At least I know I can take care of myself. But Jake could see something in her eyes that contradicted her words. Despite everything she had been through, Riley still had hope. She still believed in the possibility of finding someone who would see her as a complete person, not as a disability or an inspiration. One evening, after they had been talking for about 2 months, Jake made a decision that surprised even him. Would you like to go get coffee sometime? He asked. Not as part of the class, just because I enjoy talking with you. Riley looked at him for a long moment, and Jake wondered if he had misread the situation completely. Maybe she really did prefer to keep things simple and separate. Are you asking me on a date? She asked, and Jake couldn't tell if she was pleased or concerned. I'm asking if you'd like to spend time together outside of this parking lot, Jake said honestly. We can call it whatever you want to call it. Riley smiled then, the kind of genuine smile she had told him about painting. I'd like that, but I have one condition. What's that? You have to promise not to treat me like I'm fragile. I get enough of that from everyone else. Jake nodded. Deal. But I have a condition too. What? You have to promise to tell me if I do something wrong. I've never, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I've never dated someone with prosthetics before. I don't want to make assumptions, but I also don't want to pretend like there won't be things I need to learn. Riley's smile grew wider. You know what? I think we're going to figure this out just fine. As Jake drove home that night, he realized something had shifted between them. They had moved from being teacher and student, or even friends, to something more uncertain and exciting. For the first time in years, Jake felt like he was taking a real risk with someone who might actually be worth it. Riley, meanwhile, sat in her car for a few minutes after Jake left, thinking about what had just happened. She had built so many walls around herself since the accident, convincing herself that independence was the same thing as strength. But maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for someone who saw her as more than just a survivor. Maybe there was room for someone who made her laugh the way Jake did, who listened to her stories without trying to fix everything, who asked questions because he was genuinely interested in her answers. For the first time in 3 years, Riley allowed herself to wonder if she might have found someone who could handle both her strength and her vulnerability. Someone who wouldn't try to save her because he could see she had already saved herself. Their first coffee date was supposed to be simple, just two people getting to know each other better outside the art class. But as Jake sat across from Riley at the small cafe downtown, he realized this felt like so much more than just coffee. Riley had chosen a corner table where she could sit with her back to the wall. Jake noticed she did this often, positioning herself so she could see the whole room. He wondered if it was because she felt more comfortable being able to watch for people's reactions to her prosthetics. You know, I was nervous about this, Riley admitted, stirring her latte with careful movements. I haven't been on a proper date in almost 2 years. What made you say yes? Jake asked. Genuinely curious, Riley smiled. You're the first person in a long time who seems more interested in what I think than in what happened to me. As they talked, Jake found himself completely absorbed in Riley's stories. She told him about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, about her college years studying art, and about her decision to become a physical therapist instead of pursuing painting professionally. My dad always said I had a gift for helping people see their own strength, Riley explained. I thought physical therapy was a way to use that gift in a more practical way than art. Do you regret that choice? Jake asked. Riley considered this. For a moment, I used to think I did. After the accident, I felt like I had given up my real passion for something that didn't matter anymore. But lately, I've been thinking that maybe both paths led me to where I needed to be. Jake understood what she meant. He had made similar choices in his own life, choosing stability over his dreams of being a full-time artist. But seeing Riley's perspective made him wonder if there was still time to change course. Their coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into a long walk through the city park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that Riley kept pointing out and describing, in terms that only an artist would use. Look at how the orange is bleeding into the purple, she said, stopping to admire the sunset. Most people see a pretty sky, but there's so much more happening if you really look. Jake found himself watching Riley more than the sunset, the way she gestured with her prosthetic arms when she got excited about something, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about color and light, the way she seemed to find beauty in everything around her, even after everything she had been through. Can I ask you something? Jake said as they found a bench to sit on. Sure. How do you do it? Stay so positive? I mean, after everything that happened? Riley was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. I don't always. There are days when I wake up and feel angry at the world. Days when I miss my old life so much it physically hurts. But I learned something in physical therapy. That changed everything. She turned to face him on the bench. My therapist told me that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new who can live with what happened. I had to grieve the person I used to be before I could figure out who I was going to become. Jake felt something shift inside his chest. He had been so focused on seeing Riley as strong and inspiring that he had almost forgotten she was also human. She had bad days and struggles just like everyone else. "What about you?" Riley asked. "What are you trying to become?" The question caught Jake off guard. He had spent so much time thinking about his work, his volunteering, his day-to-day responsibilities that he had never really considered what kind of person he was trying to be. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think I've been so busy trying to be helpful that I forgot to think about what I actually want." "That's not necessarily a bad thing," Riley said. "The world needs people who want to help, but it also needs people who know how to receive help when they need it." As they sat there in comfortable silence, Jake became aware of how close they were sitting. Their knees were almost touching, and he could smell the faint scent of her perfume. He wanted to reach out and take her hand, but he hesitated. Would she be able to feel it through the prosthetic? Would it be awkward? Would she think he was being too forward? Riley seemed to sense his internal struggle. "Jake, yeah, you're overthinking this." She was right. He was so worried about doing the wrong thing that he wasn't doing anything at all. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her prosthetic hand in his. The sensation was different than he had expected. The prosthetic was cool and smooth, with mechanical joints that moved when Riley flexed her fingers. But it was still her hand, still part of her. "I can't feel that," Riley said quietly. "Not in the way you're thinking. But I can feel the pressure sensors, and I can see that you're not afraid of touching me. That means more than you know." Jake looked down at their joined hands. The prosthetic fingers were interlocked with his real ones, and somehow it felt completely natural. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of your prosthetics, but of saying or doing something that would hurt you." "The only thing that hurts is when people act like I'm made of glass," Riley said. "Or when they pretend like these don't exist." She lifted their joined hands slightly. "This is part of me now. I need someone who can accept that." "I can accept that," Jake said, and he meant it. They sat like that for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Jake found himself studying Riley's face in the growing darkness, the way her expression softened when she was thinking about something pleasant. "Riley, I'm really glad you came to art class that night." She turned to look at him, and Jake saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip. "Me too." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and nervous energy. Jake found himself leaning closer, and Riley didn't pull away. Her prosthetic hand was still in his, but her real hand came up to touch his face. "Is this okay?" he whispered. Instead of answering, Riley closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, then deeper as they both realized how much they had been wanting this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "That was, yeah," Riley whispered back. "It was." As they walked back to their cars, Jake realized something fundamental had changed between them. They had crossed a line from friendship into something more vulnerable and real. He was holding Riley's prosthetic hand again, and this time it didn't feel strange or different. It just felt like Riley. "Thank you," Riley said as they reached her car. "For what?" "For not making this weird. For not treating me like I'm fragile or broken. For just being normal about everything." Jake smiled. "Thank you for giving me a chance to figure it out." As he drove home that night, Jake realized he had learned something important. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours. Someone who challenged you to become better while accepting you exactly as you are. He had found that in Riley, and for the first time in his life, Jake felt like he had found a place where he truly belonged. 3 months into their relationship, Jake and Riley faced their first real test. They were at a busy restaurant downtown, celebrating Jake's birthday when it happened. The waiter had been friendly enough when he seated them, but Jake noticed how his eyes kept drifting to Riley's prosthetic arms. When it came time to order, the waiter did something that made Jake's blood boil. "And what would she like to drink?" the waiter asked Jake, as if Riley wasn't sitting right there. "You can ask me directly," Riley said calmly, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'll have the iced tea, please." The waiter looked embarrassed for a moment, then continued taking their order. But the damage was done. Jake felt angry and protective, while Riley seemed to shrink into herself. "I can't believe he did that," Jake said after the waiter left. "It happens more than you think." Riley replied quietly, "People don't know how to react, so they pretend I'm not there or treat me like a child." Jake wanted to say something to the waiter, to stand up for Riley, but she caught his arm. "Please don't make a scene," she said. "It'll just make things worse." This was Jake's first real glimpse into what Riley dealt with every day: the stares, the awkward interactions, the way people sometimes treated her as less than human because of her prosthetics. It opened his eyes to a world he had never had to think about before. But the restaurant incident was just the beginning. A few weeks later, they were walking through the mall when a little kid pointed at Riley and asked his mom loudly, "What's wrong with that lady's arms?" The mother looked mortified and quickly pulled her child away, but not before Jake saw how. The question affected Riley. She tried to hide it, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "Kids are just curious," Riley said later, trying to brush it off. "They don't mean anything by it." "But it still hurts," Jake said. Riley nodded. "Sometimes. But I'd rather deal with honest curiosity than adults who whisper behind my back." Jake was learning that being with Riley meant navigating a world that wasn't always kind or understanding. But he was also learning that Riley was stronger than he had ever imagined. She handled these situations with grace and patience that amazed him. The bigger challenge came when Jake met Riley's family. Her parents had driven in from their small hometown to meet the man their daughter had been talking about for months. Riley's mother, Carol, was polite but clearly protective. Over dinner, she asked Jake pointed questions about his intentions, his job, his future plans. But it was her father, Robert, who really put Jake on the spot. "You seem like a nice young man," Robert said as they sat on the porch after dinner. "But I have to ask, why are you with my daughter?" Jake was taken aback. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. Riley's been through a lot," Robert continued. "After the accident, she went through a dark period. Depression, isolation, the whole thing. We watched our confident, independent daughter become someone who was afraid to leave the house." Jake listened, beginning to understand where this was going. "She's worked so hard to get back to who she is now," Robert said. "And I need to know that you're not with her because you feel sorry for her or because you think she needs saving." Jake took a deep breath. "Mr. Johnson, I fell in love with Riley because she's the strongest person I've ever met. She makes me laugh, she challenges me to be better, and she sees the world in ways I never could. Her prosthetics are just part of who she is, not the reason I'm with her." Robert studied Jake for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good, because if you hurt her, you'll have to answer to me." Later that evening, Riley's mother pulled Jake aside in the kitchen. "I was hard on you tonight," Carol said. "But you have to understand, we've watched Riley struggle with dating since the accident. Some men treated her like she was fragile, others like she was some kind of inspiration. We needed to know you see her as a person first." "I do," Jake said. "She's the most amazing person I've ever met." Carol smiled for the first time that evening. "She says the same thing about you." But the real test of their relationship came a few weeks later. Jake and Riley were cooking dinner together at his apartment, something they had done many times before. But this time, Jake was having a particularly stressful day at work, and he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. When Riley reached for a pot on the stove, Jake automatically moved to help her, grabbing the pot handle without thinking. "I've got it," Riley said, a slight edge to her voice. "I know. I was just," Jake started, then stopped. He realized what he had done. "You were just what?" Riley asked, setting the pot down harder than necessary. "I was trying to help." "I didn't ask for help," Riley said. "I've been cooking just fine on my own for 3 years. Jake felt defensive. "I help everyone in the kitchen. It's not about your prosthetics, isn't it?" Riley turned to face him. "Because you've never grabbed a pot away from any of your other friends." Jake realized she was right. He had been treating her differently, even though he thought he wasn't. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Riley sighed. "Jake, I need you to understand something. I've worked so hard to be independent again. When you jump in to help me with things I can do myself, it makes me feel like you think I'm incapable. That's not what I think at all, Jake said. Then show me, Riley replied. Trust me to ask for help when I need it. This conversation changed something fundamental in their relationship. Jake learned to step back and let Riley do things her way, even if it took longer or looked different from how he might do it. And Riley learned to communicate her needs more clearly, rather than assuming Jake would just figure it out. They also learned to navigate the practical challenges of being together. Simple things like holding hands while walking, or Riley being able to carry groceries, required patience and creativity from both of them. But perhaps the most important lesson they learned was about strength. Jake had always seen Riley as strong because of how she had overcome her challenges. But Riley helped him understand that real strength sometimes meant accepting help, being vulnerable, and letting someone else take care of you. I spent so much time proving I could do everything alone, Riley told him one evening as they walked through the park where they'd had their first kiss. But being with you has taught me that independence and interdependence aren't the same thing. Jake squeezed her prosthetic hand. What do you mean? I mean that I can be strong and independent and still let you help me sometimes. And you can. Be caring and protective without treating me like I'm fragile. By the end of their first year together, Jake and Riley had figured out how to be partners in the truest sense. They had learned each other's languages, both spoken and unspoken. They had navigated the curious stares and awkward questions together. They had met each other's families and earned their approval. Most importantly, they had learned that love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who accepts you completely and helps you become the person you want to be. As they stood in their favorite spot in the park, watching the sunset paint the sky in Riley's beloved colors, Jake realized that he had found something he never knew he was looking for. Not just love, but partnership. Not just acceptance, but growth. And Riley, feeling the warmth of Jake's hand in hers, realized that she had found someone who loved all of her strength, her vulnerability, her past, and her future. Someone who saw her prosthetics not as a limitation, but as part of the incredible journey that had made her who she was. Together, they had learned that the most beautiful love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing to grow together, one challenge at a time. 2 years after that first spilled paint jar, Jake found himself standing in the same community center classroom where it all began. But this time, he wasn't there to teach art. He was there to ask the most important question of his life. Riley thought they were just setting up for a regular Tuesday class. She had arrived early to help Jake arrange the easels, just like she had done countless times before. But when she turned around, she found Jake standing in the middle of the room, looking nervous and excited at the same time. What's wrong? She asked, noticing his expression. Nothing's wrong, Jake said, taking a deep breath. In fact, everything's about to be perfect. Before Riley could ask what he meant, the classroom door opened. One by one, all their students filed in, Mrs. Rodriguez, Tom, Lisa, and several others who had joined the class over the years. But instead of going to their easels, they arranged themselves in a circle around the room. What's going on? Riley asked, looking confused. We have a surprise for you, Mrs. Rodriguez said with a huge smile. Jake walked over to the easel by the window, Riley's favorite spot. Clipped to it was a large piece of paper that looked like a collaborative artwork. As Riley moved closer, she realized it was made up of individual letters, each one painted by a different student. The letters spelled out, "Will you marry me?" Riley's prosthetic hand flew to her mouth in surprise. When she turned around, Jake was down on one knee, holding a ring box. "Riley," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly, 2 years ago, you walked into this room and changed my life. You taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better. Riley's eyes filled with tears as she looked around the room at all the faces of people who had become like family to them. You showed me that strength comes in many forms, Jake continued. and that the most beautiful art isn't created with perfect hands, but with a perfect heart. He opened the ring box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Riley looked down at Jake, then at the artwork their students had created, then back at Jake. Through her tears, she managed to whisper, "Yes." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying, Tom was whooping with joy, and Lisa was taking pictures with her phone. As Jake slipped the ring onto Riley's finger, her real finger, not the prosthetic one, Riley realized that this moment was perfect not because it was flawless, but because it was theirs. Planning their wedding brought new challenges, but also new joys. Riley worried about how she would look in the wedding photos, about the logistics of exchanging rings, about their first dance. She had dreamed of her wedding day since she was a little girl, but those dreams had been from before the accident. "I don't know if I can do this," Riley confided to Jake one evening as they looked through wedding magazines. "Everything seems so complicated now." Jake set down the magazine he was reading. "What do you mean?" "The dress, the ceremony, the reception. It all feels like it's designed for people who don't have prosthetics. What if I can't hold the bouquet properly? What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if we look awkward during our first dance?" Jake moved closer to her on the couch. "Riley, do you remember what you told me on our first date? About becoming someone new instead of trying to go back to who you were before?" Riley nodded. "Our wedding is going to be about celebrating who we are now, not who we might have been in some other life. We're going to make it work for us." And they did. Riley found a dress with beautiful sleeves that complemented her prosthetic arms rather than hiding them. The florist created a bouquet with a special handle that Riley could grip easily. Their first dance was choreographed to work with Riley's balance and movement style. But the most special touch was Riley's decision to have her prosthetic arms decorated. For the wedding, she worked with a local artist to paint delicate flowers and vines on the prosthetics, turning them into something beautiful rather than trying to disguise them. The wedding day itself was everything they had hoped for and more. As Riley walked down the aisle, she felt no shame or self-consciousness about her prosthetics. Instead, she felt proud of how far she had come and grateful for the man waiting for her at the altar. During the ceremony, when it came time to exchange rings, Riley and Jake had practiced the movement so many times that it felt natural. But what moved everyone to tears was Jake's vows. "Riley," he said, his voice strong and clear, "you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who needs you, but about finding someone who chooses you. You didn't need me to save you. You had already saved yourself. But you chose to let me be part of your journey, and that's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Riley's vows were equally moving. "Jake, you saw me as a whole person when I was still learning to see myself. That way, you loved me not despite my prosthetics, but including them. You helped me understand that I didn't have to choose between being strong and being loved. I could be both." The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and joy. Riley's first dance with Jake was beautiful in its simplicity. They had chosen a slow song that allowed them to just sway together, focusing on each other rather than complicated steps. But the moment that really captured their love story was when Jake's nephew, a curious 4-year-old, approached Riley during the reception. "Why are your arms different?" he asked with the innocent directness of a child. Riley knelt down to his level. "I was in an accident, and my arms were hurt so badly that the doctors had to give me new ones. These are my robot arms. Pretty cool, right?" The little boy's eyes went wide with amazement. "Robot arms? That's awesome. Can you lift heavy things?" "I can lift some things," Riley laughed. "But the most important thing I can do with them is hug the people I love." She demonstrated by giving the boy a gentle hug, and he giggled with delight. Jake watched this interaction from across the room, his heart swelling with love and pride. This was the woman he had married, someone who could turn a potentially awkward moment into something beautiful and educational. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, still in their wedding clothes, Jake and Riley reflected on their journey. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't spilled that paint water on my first day?" Riley asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder. "Every day," Jake said. "But I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Riley looked down at her wedding ring, then at her decorated prosthetic arms. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine ever being happy again, let alone finding love. And now, Jake asked, now I know that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. If I hadn't lost my arms, I never would have come to that art class. I never would have met you. I never would have learned that I was stronger than I thought. Jake kissed the top of her head. And I never would have learned that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be perfect for them. 6 months later, they honeymooned in a small coastal town where Riley could paint the ocean. Views she loved so much. Jake watched his wife set up her easel on the beach, her prosthetic hands moving with practiced grace as she arranged her paints. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Riley worked to capture the colors on her canvas. Jake stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "It's beautiful," he said, looking at her painting. "It's home," Riley replied. Leaning back against him, Jake understood what she meant. Home wasn't a place. For them, it was this feeling of being completely accepted, completely understood, completely loved. It was the knowledge that they had found someone who would stay through the challenges and celebrate the victories. As Riley continued painting, Jake realized that their love story wasn't about overcoming obstacles or inspiring others. It was about two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, not to be fixed or saved, but to be fully themselves. The prosthetic arms that had once seemed like barriers had become just another part of the woman he loved, and Riley, who had once thought she would never find someone who could love all of her, had discovered that the best love doesn't try to change you. It helps you become more of who you already are. Standing there on the beach, watching his wife create something beautiful, Jake knew they had found what everyone searches for, but few people find: a love that feels like coming home.